بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين محمد وآل محمد. In the name of Allah, the Compassionate, the Merciful, blessings be upon Prophet Muhammad and his progeny. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We finally made it here, alhamdulillah. You guys have amazing traffic. I thought London had crazy traffic in the UK, but here it's something else. Apparently on our way here there were 2 blocked routes, so the sister had to really scramble around trying to find the right way to get here. Alhamdulillah, we made it, and I'm honored to be here from Ottawa, all the way from Ottawa, to have this discussion with everybody here on mental health matters in terms of what does it mean to have a Muslim student life balance, and not necessarily just Muslim students, any student really who's struggling with trying to figure out their identity, trying to figure out what does it mean to have balance with school, life, family, academics, work, the whole balance around that in terms of a mental health perspective. So some of the things we're going to take a look at today is the actual definition. What is mental health? And before we got here, everybody got a chance to also think about that, right? So we'll be sharing some of our thoughts and answers later on. We're also going to take a look at some important statistics in terms of student mental health. Then we're going to take a look at common mental health issues, and then the actual discussion on what does it mean to have that kind of balance, and then Q&A, of course. So when we take a look at what does it mean, what does the actual concept mean in terms of mental health? So the Canadian Mental Health Association describes mental health in terms of striking a balance in all aspects of your life, whether it's social, physical, spiritual, economic, or mental. And so it's in terms of a state of well-being in which every individual realizes his or her own potential and can cope with the normal stressors of life. So you can work productively and fruitfully and somehow contribute meaningfully to the community. So it's basically overall like physical health, right? So taking care of your eating, your sleeping, your exercise. So if you're ill, for example, you have a cold or you have an actual disease, perhaps something like cardiovascular diseases or diabetes, what would you do? You take your insulin shots, right? You take your medication. And you would try to balance that with healthy eating, healthy lifestyle, good sleeping habits, right? So you would have that kind of balance with that. So why is it when it comes to mental health, all of a sudden, in our communities, the diverse ethno-cultural communities or faith-based, they tend to ignore, they tend to deny, or avoid anything that has to do with mental illness. And so why do you suppose that is? Or even those who are struggling with the illnesses sometimes, they would also push that away, avoid, and ignore. So it all comes down to fear. It all comes down to misunderstandings. It all comes down to misconceptions, lack of knowledge. We take it further, it comes down to shame. Perhaps people have the shame of sharing, what is in their family. The misunderstanding that, oh, this could be something genetic. This could be something that if I marry into this family, my children are going to have this. And so we have these misconceptions and these taboos around the topic. When I first started to study psychology in university, I got the typical Iraqi response, which is "Rahat sarin majnoona," right? Which means you're going to be crazy like those who you're treating. And that's the typical, response right away. Till now, I still hear that from the elders in the community, which is, I find disturbing that they still think that, right? But I didn't really care. I pushed forward. Usually we have the typical engineering, what else? Doctors, nothing in between, right? In our communities, in our culture. So nothing else exists in between. So I chose the in-between, taking social sciences and the science of the mind, right? To figure out a pathway that would work for me. I always wanted to help people through the soul rather than through the cell, which is our strict science, right? So I continued with this path, and alhamdulillah, I found it beneficial in terms of being able to combine the science of psychology and spirituality and religion. And inshallah, for those of you who'll be attending the rest of the events this weekend, I don't want to get into too much because we have a whole full day seminar tomorrow where I'm going to get into lots of details. I'm just giving an overview with this topic today. You'll see how we can combine religion in terms of Islamic faith as well as psychology and mental health. And it's a beautiful mesh because they fit. And we'll talk more about that later on. Now, the response is a funny response from our community in terms of, oh, you're going to be just as crazy as those who you're treating. The statistics, however, show otherwise in terms of this being a serious issue. And so when we take a look at student statistics, with the National College Health Assessment survey done in 2016, and the link is there. I don't expect you guys to write this, so anybody who wants this information, you can just look it up or email me and then I'll send it to you. And they have some fascinating statistics in terms of how Canadian university students reported themselves to be feeling over the last year. If you take a look here, 64.5% felt overwhelming anxiety, 59.6% felt hopeless, and around 44.4% felt so depressed it was difficult to function. What are the implications there if you're a student who needs to have their full focus, concentration, and attention on their studies? If you're feeling this way, how do you expect to do well around exam times when your anxiety just shoots through the roof, right? You get nervous, you can't focus, and you're not eating well, you're not sleeping, you certainly drop exercise the first thing to go, right? So how will that affect you? What are the implications there? I want you to think about that, you being a student or no students. How does this affect you, knowing these numbers? Furthermore, when it comes around the very triggering topic of suicide, now, I didn't mention this at the beginning of this presentation, but of course we're going to be talking about very sensitive issues, and they could be triggering for anybody in here. So if any of you who are feeling triggered, you can leave the room if the topic becomes too much and just let one of the organizers know, and then perhaps we can chat afterwards. So if you do need to go to the washroom, just give us a thumbs up so we know you're okay. Otherwise we'll be chasing you down the hallway, right? Make sure you're okay. So in terms of the topic of suicide, are university students at risk for suicide? And of course, according to the NCHA, over the last 12 months, this is something that's serious. 13% seriously considered suicide. 8.7% of Canadian university students reported self-harm in the last year, and 2.1% attempted. So when it comes to this topic, this is something that is happening, and it's happening in the Muslim community as well. We don't like to talk about it. Again, the stigma, the fear, the misunderstanding around mental health issues, including suicide and self-harm. But it happens. It is happening. And unfortunately, we do have a lot of youth who have attempted as well as taken their lives. Now, I've spoken to lots of scholars and sheikhs and imams and learned people in the community, and this is a very interesting topic when it comes to the topic of suicide. The question comes, it begs the question of, is what they do haram? Because we know taking your life is not allowed in our faith. Now, the big consensus came down to the fact that we're dealing with somebody who is ill here, who's not in their full right mind, awareness, and consciousness. Again, we are not the ones who are judging, right? And we're not encouraging people to take their lives also if they are feeling low. We're encouraging people to get help and support. But the consensus, and especially those families who are very worried, of course, for those family members who have gone down this path, it's not haram in that sense. And this is not me speaking, this is what I have learned from those who do fiqh and jurisprudence and have explored this. Again, we're dealing with people who are not well. And so they don't fit into this category of people taking their lives as being haram. It's a very sensitive topic, like I said. But the implications here for the youth and university students who are feeling so overwhelmed, like we saw earlier with anxiety and stress and whatnot, how are they coping? How are they dealing? Why do they feel that suicide is the answer to their problems? I hear all the time students coming into my office, especially around midterm and exam time. We feel this way a little bit more in terms of feeling overwhelmed. And so the solution is to walk away or just feel like you don't want to live anymore. But then if we take it a step further and take a look at, in terms of how do mental health issues impact academics, well, you can see that there are factors that do affect our academics from reaching, for you reaching your full potential. So 42.4% reported feeling stress. Now, this is a given. You don't really need research to prove and indicate, when you're feeling stressed, you can't really focus, right? Physically and mentally, it's just really hard to focus when you're feeling overwhelmed and stressed with whatever the issues are around you. And so anxiety as well has a big impact on academics, sleep difficulties, and we know that. How many of you get 3-4 hours of sleep, if you're lucky, when you're preparing for a midterm or an exam? Right? Sometimes I remember one night I just slept not even an hour right before the exam. So I don't remember retaining much information afterwards, and all of us do that cramming, which doesn't really work well when it comes to retaining information, right? But sleep has a huge impact on your mental health in terms of focus, regenerating cells. Those of you who are in science know this a little bit more detail, of course, in terms of how you regenerate cells and how memory is stored in your brain when you do get proper sleep. Of course, it gives you the energy the next day to deal with everything as well. Being sick can also have an impact with depression. Interestingly enough, internet use and computer games, and I see a lot of clients actually and students who have that as well in terms of having addictions that affect. I see some giggles and smiles over here, and people are aware of their perhaps internet use and how that can affect their academics as well. It certainly can, because it's been considered now a form of addiction. Have you guys noticed when you're on social media how long sometimes you stay on there? You've got, 5 minutes, I'm just going to check something. You're there for an hour just scrolling through mindless things that take away from your actual study time and other obligations as well, right? So it can have a huge impact. Although we're making a good use of social media today by recording this event, that's awesome. You can use it in a positive way, but you can also use it in a negative way that can definitely impact your studies. And work has also had an impact on academics, obviously, self-explanatory. It takes time away from your actual study time. Finally here, the question of, are students seeking help for their mental health issues? So the statistics show 26.3% of Canadian students have reported, who were diagnosed or treated by a professional, have gone in the last year to get help. Now, as a mental health professional, as a therapist, I don't see that as large enough considering all the statistics that we saw earlier when 60% plus, what was it again, 60%? 64.5% felt overwhelming anxiety and hopelessness and depressed. I would like to see that number higher in terms of people actually coming to get help. Why are people not coming to get help? Again, it's around the stigma, it's around the fear, around the attitude of, I'm not going to share my problems with anybody, I can handle this, I can deal with this on my own, I'm tough, right, I'm tough. You have this attitude with the males as well, we don't share emotion, we don't talk about issues, we just keep it all in, right? And also add the layer of culture on top of that, in terms of, in our cultures, is a huge pressure from our families. It stays in the family, right? We don't share, we don't talk, it's aib, it's taboo, all of this kind of mentality. And, it's sad, near the end of the term, we have a rush of students right before the drop deadline for courses, right? The deadline to save yourself, basically. You haven't studied all term, you haven't done well, and then all of a sudden you come in and, hey, I'm going to drop these courses. You save yourself, but it doesn't really solve the problem or the issue that you've been dealing with all term, whether it's a family issue, whether it is a mental health issue that has impacted you, right? So like I was saying, I would prefer this number to be higher, but the other numbers that we looked at obviously lower. I'd rather people come in and share good stories with me than negative stories. And I always make the joke, with clients, I hope to never see you again in my office, right? I'll see you outside in the community or on campus, but I hope to not see you again in my office. Primarily because hopefully that they've worked through their struggles, worked through their issues, and been able to reach their full academic potential as well as their potential in their lives. Is what I'm saying making sense so far in terms of the numbers that you see here? Yeah? Makes sense, right? And the reality is we all deal with some kind of pressure, some kind of issue in our lives. Who doesn't have stress? It becomes a problem when you don't take care of that stress. How it bleeds over into affecting your health and your overall well-being. So what are some of the most common illnesses that we see in our community, as well as with students? So anxiety is one of the top issues I see in my office. Stress, depression, suicide, addictions. And addictions has a whole range, ranging from drugs, alcohol, gambling, as well as pornography, which has been on the rise in our community, believe it or not. Mood disorders, which can range from personality disorders, bipolar, cross-generational cultural issues. This is a big one within our communities, right? The pressure from the elders, their mentality in terms of what things should be like, how things should be like, and you have to be an engineer, you have to be a doctor, and so even though you're a talented artist, you have to do this because it's what's expected of your culture and your family and society, right? So all of these pressures can have a huge impact. As well as when you look at the actual culture, depending on what ethno-cultural background you are, then you have those nuances as well from our parents and grandparents and the pressures of having to carry on or just fitting with that. And don't forget, living here in the West, we grew up with a dual cultural identity, if not more, if you come from mixed cultural families, right? And then you have the added layer of faith on top of that as well. So how do you navigate that? How do you manage all of that? That's a lot, and this is a very common issue in our community. Then you have identity issues, which is what we just touched upon. Post-traumatic stress disorder, which is something that we've had every generation, whether it's from the Iraqis from years ago, in the last few years it's been in Syria, and then you see more and more in how this affects our parents, the children who grow up in such families or in war-torn countries, and how does that affect them here, or people who are growing up here who have families abroad, and how does that affect you? And unfortunately we see that in our offices as well. And issues related to domestic violence, abuse, sexual abuse, child abuse, the list goes on there. And of course, with Islamophobia as well. What do you think are some other issues in our community? Go ahead, please do share. What do you think we also have in our own community in terms of mental health illnesses, struggles, challenges? These are the most common ones, but what are some other ones that people encounter and deal with? We hit them all? Financial, yes, financial difficulties have a huge impact, of course. What else? Gender, in what sense? Gender roles, expectations, that's been changing over the last few years within our communities as well, right? You see more women now more educated or more out in the field working, and so that can cause a balance of change within the household, the traditional roles, right? These are more cultural, because if you look at Islamic values in terms of encouragement of seeking knowledge, this is open to everybody, right? All the way up to China, right, as the Prophet says. Women are also allowed, in terms of rights and roles, to work, and of course, the money that the woman gets through her work is hers, not necessarily her responsibility to the household. But because of the lifestyle that we've had over the last few years in terms of financially, like the brother was saying, there's the pressure for both, you know, genders to contribute to the household, to live a certain lifestyle, right? So yeah, these are definitely issues that we have in our community. So these are things that I've seen in my work as a therapist in terms of the people that come in, but also what I hear from the community, whether it's in the centers or events. You hear all of these things. Are these familiar to you? Do these sound familiar? Yeah, right? Definitely. So how can you support somebody who is dealing with a mental health struggle or issue or anything related to what we've been discussing? So you want to assess for risk. What we mean by risk is self-harm or harm to others. If you feel that somebody is at risk, then you definitely need to take them to the hospital or get them the professional help immediately that they will need. Now, I know you guys are not trained professionals, so it'll be hard for you to assess. What I do recommend you do, for those of you who are interested, you know how you've heard of first aid courses? There's mental health first aid courses that you can take, which can teach you the basics in terms of just learning about mental health and how to support somebody who is dealing with it, not necessarily be a counselor, but how to help them get the support that they may need. So, and this will give you the tools also to assess if somebody is dealing with this issue, how you can, or if somebody who's at risk, how to perhaps help them get the support that they need. We want to talk about not being judgmental, because this is huge in our community. People are always worried about judgment, like we said earlier, but confidentiality as well. That's a big one, which is probably why people don't come, because we all know, you know, our community, we love to talk about everybody do istigaba and, you know, all of that. However, when it comes to our work ethics, we are liable, just like medical doctors and lawyers and all of those who are registered under a school, we're liable for that. So it is, we take that very seriously. I do as well. I know tons of stories of people like you wouldn't believe all over the world and here who do open up and talk, alhamdulillah, and I feel honored to be in that position where people can trust and talk about the struggles that they have. And so you want to be, if you are in that position, you don't want to judge, and obviously confidentiality. Who are we to judge? Right? Allah's the all-judger, not us. Even if somebody comes to you with something that is not halal or haram or whatever, we're not there to be the haram police on people when they come to you with something that they've done. And I always see the look of horror of Muslim clients when they walk in and they see me coming out with the hijab, because they're like, oh dear, she's going to know what I've done. But alhamdulillah, when they come in and we talk about, you know, what counseling is and what I'm there to do as my role, alhamdulillah, I've had hordes of people come on in afterwards, because they tell other people in the community, hey, you know, Berak really helped me in this issue, and then so they'll send other people to come, alhamdulillah, and so the trust is there. So you want to nurture that trust with people around you. Don't, you know, be the haram police. You're there to help somebody who could be potentially severely depressed. Give reassurance and information. So if you, obviously you don't know what to tell them, direct them to a service or somebody that you think that they can help, and encourage them to get the appropriate professional help and self-help and other support as well. So these are your basic tips if you know somebody who is struggling. And I've heard this question, what if they don't want to go get help? What if they're constantly in that state, you know, of threatening to harm themselves, or they're just not doing what they need to do to get help? There's only so much you can do. It is not your role to be there 24/7 for them, and it can be quite frightening when you hear somebody who's threatening to kill themselves over and over again. It is not your role. Yes, show empathy, sympathy, and support a non-judgmental attitude, but it is not your role. This is to lighten up the load on you. It's not your role to go and do that. But be there and direct them to get help. How can we create a positive culture around mental health? It really has to do with modeling the way. So I would imagine that hopefully that somebody such as myself, who is a practitioner in the field, who is talking openly about this topic, can encourage other people to get into the field of studies of social work, mental health, psychology, spirituality, and religion, because it's all combined, it's all there, right? And it starts with being open and honest about your own mental health and have a check-in with yourself. So earlier we posed the question, well, let me get through this and then we'll ask the questions of what we got you to think about. So you want to check in regularly as well. Give people the opportunity to discuss how they're doing, whether it's you or other people that you can trust with whatever information that you may have. And encourage self-care. So especially stressful times, encourage people to rest and relax. But this goes for yourself as well. What does that mean? That means, you know, unplugging from everything, really, because that can cause a lot of stress sometimes, right? Or, you know, taking time off sitting by the river and just breathing in the fresh oxygen, and meditation, you know, eating healthy foods, things like that. Reading a good book, and I don't mean physics, you know, or biochemistry, or organic chemistry, or inorganic chemistry, or whatever, you know, all that fun stuff. Taking time off, it could be 5-10 minutes during the day to regenerate your mind and your soul. So important things to slow down, to regenerate yourself, to move forward, right? And establish support networks. So set up a buddy system or encourage people to check in with each other. I know this sounds almost foreign in our community, right? But if you think about it, we have close friends that we check into, we talk to about our problems. Sometimes it can be too much and overwhelming for people as well. So you need to set sometimes boundaries around yourself to say no. And sometimes it can hurt when people push you away or you have to do that, but it's not personal. Sometimes you can't take on listening to people's problems, or people can't take on listening to your problems. So you have to learn how to set boundaries for yourself and set boundaries for others as well. It's part of self-care. Now, in terms of managing the signs and symptoms of stress, I encourage you on Sunday to come to the workshop series, because I'll be getting into I have a whole workshop on this topic, but I've included some strategies here in terms of what you can do as a student to have that balance in your life, right? So these are small things that you can do, but will have a deep impact overall if you include them in your schedule. So breathing. Breathing. Ever thought of breathing? I mean, you breathe to live, right? But breathing could include meditative, deep, slow breathing to get oxygen through your nose, slowing down your heart rate, getting oxygen where it needs to go into your system, right? One student, when I did a meditative breathing exercise with them, told me, I feel oxygenated. And that's exactly what you're doing. You're getting oxygen where it needs to go in your body to slow down your heart rate, to just feel oxygenated. There's a lot of science involved. I encourage you to read up about it if you're more interested. Progressive relaxation has to do with muscle tension and relaxing, tensing and relaxing. And this is something you can do from head to toe through all your muscles in your body. You can do this while you do the breathing. You can do this while listening to relaxation music, perhaps du'as or your favorite Quran or latmiya, like I like doing that. Maybe the slower ones, the faster ones, I feel like working out with that, you know, gets the heart rate going, right? But when you combine a whole bunch of these strategies together, meditation, visualization. So visualization means having imagery. So imagining yourself somewhere or some kind of scene or memory that brings you peace, that can trigger that peace. So let's say you went to ziyarah. How do you feel when you go to ziyarah or hajj or a special vacation where you're by the ocean, right? So you can visualize some kind of image that can give you that peace or that serenity. It's a very powerful tool when you combine using spirituality. Getting a massage, the power of touch is incredible. It releases oxytocin into the body, the love, happy hormone. So this is a great thing to do if you have a health insurance. I know it works in Ontario, I'm not sure how it works here. Get a prescription from a doctor and go do that. It's a very healthy exercise with partners as well to do, the power of touch, but again, it releases stress hormones. Exercise is your #1 stress reducer. People ask me, what is the natural way of taking care of your health instead of medication? Exercise, believe it or not, whether it's working out, whether it's going for a run, finding something that works for you to releasing the stress hormone buildup in your body is vital. Natural route, right? Humor, believe it or not. Ever heard of fake it till you make it when it comes to smiling and laughing? You heard of that expression? Yeah, there's a science behind that. When you laugh or smile, even if you don't feel like it, you know, like that, it triggers the receptors in your brain to release the happy hormones because it thinks you're actually happy, and then you eventually start feeling happy. Try it one day when you're really upset or angry or bothered or sad. Give it a shot. It might work, right? And so there are other things as well that you can do. A healthy distraction, volunteering, a hobby, that can also help balance things out. I know it's really hard when you've got 5, 6 classes, labs, work, you could be a parent as well. It's really challenging. I understand how it can be really challenging when there's not enough hours of the day to do everything. But it's also something, you know, if you want to succeed at everything else, you need to have that balance. So these are short-term strategies that we just talked about you can implement, and then there's long-term stress management strategies. This is where therapy comes in, and every single one of these that you see here are things that I do in therapy with clients. So we look at how to be a positive thinker. Obviously, easily said than actually thinking and feeling it, but it requires a process sometimes when you do come to therapy to work through it. So how to end negative talk, thinking about things in a positive way, practicing positive language. I can't, no way, never. Those of you who study linguistics know the impact of language on the brain and how you feel, right? It's huge. So instead of saying, I can't, next time you feel like saying I can't, say, I can, but I choose not to. You're taking control back. You're taking power back, right? I'll give you an example. Can you control the weather? Can you control the awful traffic that you have here in Montreal? We certainly could not on our way over here. And in the car we kept saying, you know, عَسَى أَن تَكْرَهُونَ شَيْئًا وَهُوَ خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ. Verily you may hate something, the verse in the Quran, and it's good for you. We're saying there must be something good out of this. We'll figure it out later. But that attitude of control, let me just tell you straight up, you do not have control over anything except what? Except what? What do you have control over? Your attitude? Your thoughts? Well, thoughts is a little bit tricky, but there's certainly ways of working with that. Your behavior. You have control over how you choose to respond to difficult and challenging situations. You can let your stress hit through the roof and get very anxious. You can freak out, right? You can allow these things to overtake you. But then what do you get out of that? What happens when you let these things get to you? You lose control, even worse, right? So the strategy here when it comes, one of the biggest things I'd like you to take out of today's presentation is this thought. Forget about control. When we're talking about faith-based therapy as well, who has the ultimate control? Come on guys, I want a little bit of interaction here. Who has ultimate control? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We believe that, right? So we don't have control, He has control, but we have control over how we choose to respond to the challenges He throws our way. And we have this in the Quran, we have this in the Hadith, we have this from the examples of the Prophet and the Ahlul Bayt. That's a whole other lecture by itself. But the gist of it is that we have this as an example to deal with the challenges of our life. So throw that idea out the window. Acceptance is a big one. Accept the reality that you do not have control over challenging things, but you have control over how you choose to handle these situations. In that split second, and this is where we use a terminology like, oh, the shaitan's going to come into your head and tell you to go this way or that way. Yeah, there's a lot to do with that. In that split second where you can lose your temper, you can let your anxiety overtake you, and then you'll have a really bad reaction to a difficult situation. You have a choice. And the choice comes with using terminology such as, I choose not to. I can't is just going to take control and it just gets messy. So I can, but I choose. However, I choose not to take on 3 part-time jobs, 5 courses, and this responsibility and this group and this, it's too much. You're human and we have our limitations, right? So this comes around, again, to avoid being influenced by factors and peoples around us that could really impact you. Learning how to dispute irrational beliefs. This is a challenging one, but very rewarding when it comes to these challenges. Seeing problems as opportunities. This is one of my favorite ones because I see it very closely tied to Islamic counseling implications and practices. So those of you, inshallah, who will be joining us on Sunday, I have a whole presentation on Islamic counseling strategies. And like I said, I find this concept of seeing problems as opportunities. This is where you redirect the energy. So a challenge that comes your way, you redirect the negative energy into something else. This is where acceptance comes in as well, right? You don't have control, but I accept I don't have control, so what can I do now? Then what? What is the worst thing that could happen? Preparing yourself mentally, working through those strategies, right? So seeing problems as opportunities gives you the opportunity for growth, development, seeing how you work through challenges, developing your skills, meeting new people perhaps, right? Connecting with positive energy and people around you. Seeing problems as opportunities. Redirecting or reinventing yourself. Redirecting your energy. So some other strategies: relabeling emotions, building skills, time management. At Ottawa, or at Carleton University where I work, we have a service where students can go and actually sit with an academic advisor to help with time management strategies and procrastination and motivation. Sound familiar? Yeah? I would imagine the services here at the university here would also have similar support services. So I encourage you, for those of you who are struggling with time management, to check it out, see what they have here to help you with that, because it's vital at the beginning of the school year, like we are right now, to learn these strategies. And of course, communication, problem solving, and talking things out with people. So if it means, like we were saying earlier, somebody that you trust, or perhaps coming to see a counselor to work through some struggles that could be very overwhelming in the moment. So what does it mean? And here I want a little bit more interaction, guys, not just me talking, all right? What does it mean to have the Muslim student life balance? Before we get into details here, let me ask you the question: what is mental health to you? I'm sure you had time to think about it before we got here and also throughout this presentation. What does it mean to you? Please do share your answers. Silence. Yes. Sorry, I'm going to have to ask you to speak up. Emotional well-being, psychological well-being, social well-being. So that's what it means to you. All right.
Being in that right state of mind whereby if those things are not right, and it influence how you interact with people, how you feel yourself.
So if those aspects are not in balance, then it becomes really challenging to. So how you interact with yourself and people around you. Makes sense, yeah. What else? Thank you for sharing. What is mental health, and what does it mean to you in terms of balance? I see people are still in deep thought about this one, or you're hesitant to share. Was it pretty much what we described up here? Yes? Were you guys fed sugar, and you're having a sugar crash right now? So what does it mean to have that balance? Well, first of all, we mentioned earlier the thought, when I hear the word Muslim student life, or the words rather, Muslim student life balance, for me personally, growing up here in the West, for me it comes to my mind in terms of identity. In terms of what does it mean to be a Canadian, Iraqi, Muslim here, for me personally. What does it mean to have that? Because growing up here, we're constantly bombarded with things that we see at school, right, in the media and popular culture around us, and what we are raised with from a faith-based perspective, but also culturally, whether it's language, food, customs, rituals, right? And so you're bombarded with all of these things that are just overload to your sensories as a child growing up. How do you come up with that schema or that mentality, that worldview of combining both of these worlds? It's not easy, right? You find a lot of people struggle with that. Who am I? What am I? We all go through that as teenagers anyways, and then in your early 20s here at university or higher education, you're constantly bombarded with meeting different people, right? Meeting different people of different faiths, meeting different Muslims, right? The Sunni Shias, like what? You know, you grow up thinking, believing one thing, and all of a sudden you see something else, and then you're bombarded with, oh, how do I deal with that? How do I understand this? And then it's no longer the challenge of, this is what my parents taught me. You actually have to go and read, right? You actually have to go and be a critical thinker, which is what you were taught here to be in university, whether it's through your philosophy classes or psychology or stats, one of my favorite courses, you know, statistics or whatever challenge, logic, right? You were challenged with actually learning about things now, not just what your parents taught you. And you having to be able to take in that information, that knowledge, and formulating somewhat of an intelligent answer when you were asked, why do you pray on a Torah, for example? You know, small things, part of our Muslim Shia identity, perhaps, you know. So these are just some examples. What could be some examples that you have encountered in terms of that clash? For girls, the obvious thing is, why do you wear a hijab? Are you bald under there? Tablecloth? Oh, I've heard that one. Right? What about the brothers? You know, nowadays I just look around everywhere and I'm like, oh, mashallah, we've got lots of brothers. The beards. But really, it's a fashion statement more than anything, right? Got a lot of Muslims around. No, this is just a fashion thing. The beard, right? That's a different culture all by itself. But what are some of the challenges that you encounter? Gender relations, perhaps, in university? If we look in the room here, the obvious segregation that we have. These are things that we grow up with not thinking about. But people who are not of the faith and the culture, they would look at it as disrespect, perhaps. Why do women pray behind men? Are they not equal? Are they not respected? What's up with that? Right? And then all these misconceptions start coming. Come on, guys, help me out here. What are some of the challenges?
I mean, the main challenge for me was to please my parents and my brothers and my community, and also to please my friends at school. So to live that, or to try to live up to those expectations in two worlds that might, from the point of view of a teenager, look contradictory, but so you kind of live contradictory lives at the same time.
The contradictory lives of trying to please your parents, your family, and your friends, and the social pressures around you. What does pleasing mean to you? This is a psychological concept, and I see this issue a lot, a struggle.
Well, really be accepted and loved. I think that's what pleasing comes down to.
So being accepted and loved by everyone around you. How difficult was it to try and please everybody? Are you a people pleaser, brother?
Am I a people pleaser?
Yes.
I work tirelessly to.
You work tirelessly, and that's part of the culture that we grow up in terms of being a khadim, a servant, of serving others and helping others, which can be a beautiful thing, but at the same time could be draining and negative for those people who take advantage of this nature, right? And not setting boundaries and helping yourself and having a healthy balance of what that means to serve and please, right? So it can be very challenging sometimes as well. Right? And then, I'm not saying you, brother, but I'm saying for this example here that I'm about to say, is that sometimes people become doormats, right? To bend over backwards to try and please an abusive husband, for example, a partner, an abusive wife, or it could be an abusive sibling, friend, or parent. Where do we draw the line when it comes to balance, when it comes to helping others and being there for others? Because sometimes a person who is a giver, you have somebody who is a taker of that nature, the narcissistic taker. And so the pleaser, this is a perfect match, by the way, for relationships. This is a perfect match made in hell, in the sense that the giver will keep on giving to try to please and receive love and acceptance. And the taker, right, will never be pleased. Hence, the giver will keep on giving to try to get the approval and the love and the acceptance. And the taker will keep on taking, and hurting. And we know this. We've seen this in our communities. And it's also one of the biggest problems that we have in our communities, the general Canadian population and society, but also within the Muslim community in terms of domestic violence, in terms of abuse, in terms of hurting people like that. It's there, but we don't publicly talk about it. And it's time that we do, because what's happening with the divorce rate in our community? Right? We see a lot of that. We see a lot of broken families because the essence of families coming together to begin with is not coming with the proper intention. All about looks and money and not connecting and understanding and seeing people in terms of spousal selection. And this is something in university is the time where we have our eyes on each other, which is normal and natural. Like, ooh, potential, ooh, that's normal. This is a human nature. Where are you going to look for an appropriate spouse? Yes, in the settings that we grow up in. There's nothing wrong with that. But of course, it's how we do it that's appropriate within our cultural and our religious framework, right? But in terms of spousal selection, this is always a fun topic to discuss. But the short view of this is you got to think long term, not just temporary or in the short run. How is this going to help you grow spiritually as a human being? Right? And again, we're bombarded with society around us in terms of expectations, of looks, and all of these things that just down the road, when you are in that unhealthy relationship, you think back, that was the worst thing I could have done for myself. And a lot of people will have children by that point, and it becomes even more challenging. How can you have healthy relationships with a partner you're not happy with, or that you being abused by, and how are you supposed to model a good, healthy family to the next generation, right? So that can be a whole other workshop on its own. But this is the gist of these challenges that you have at this point in your life as a university student, right? We look at, like we said, the cross-generational challenges with our families, the responsibilities of, being on the right path. What can I do with my degree? Is this really what I want to be doing? Am I doing this to please, again, the parents, because, we don't have any doctors in our family and I'm going to be the first one, or we are a family of doctors and I have to continue. So all of these pressures are things that we all experience. So what does it mean to balance all of this? And how do you balance faith? How do you balance Islam and your duties and your responsibilities, especially when you're bombarded by so much around you? Let me give you something that will lighten up your hearts. Guess what? As a student, that is your jihad, that is your struggle right there. And you're getting thawab and brownie points for that. The more you study and you can't attend majalis, or you can't go to the nights of Ramadan because you have an exam the next day, guess what? The more you are studying and putting effort there, the more thawab you're getting. That is your struggle. That is your effort as a student. I'm sure you guys have heard this one before, right? Yeah? No? Oh, okay, now you have. You've heard something good, right? Because you are putting your intention, you're putting your work ethic and your values towards something that is going to build you in the future, right? In a positive way. I hope what you're studying is going to be meaningful to you and what you can contribute to society. And this is where you're putting all your effort and energy. You guys seen how you study? Like when you sit there and you're just focusing and trying to get that information all in, it takes a lot of work to do that, right? So hopefully this will lighten up your hearts and your energy, especially Muharram coming around the corner, and let's say you have an exam or a midterm or an assignment, you really want to be attending the majlis, but alas, you have to hand in this assignment or work on it. You're getting thawab for being there. Just say, Ya Ba Abdullah, you're getting the thawab inshallah for it. So as a student, like I said, I hope this has enlightened you in terms of your effort and your challenge. Being a student in itself gives you a lot working towards that as a Muslim. But then you also have the demands and the duties in terms of prayer, in terms of fasting. That can be quite challenging, studying and fasting, right? I personally found it to be less distracting. When I'm fasting, I tend to have more focus certain times of the day, of course. But I'm less distracted by having to eat or going to the washroom or, oh, I'm hungry, what am I going to eat next? Because when you're fasting, you don't really feel much after a certain point in the day, right? And it's, again, that struggle of conditioning your mind and your body. So it depends how you work with that. What else? What else does it mean as a student, to have that balance? I'm going to have to ask you to speak up, huh? Yeah.
A struggle that I've experienced when I've spoken to other people also who have experienced this, having very high levels of stress, and then kind of losing that sense of purpose and reminding yourself that God is bigger than all of this, and there is a bigger purpose to that. But then you fall in this loop of feeling guilty for the stress that you're feeling because you feel like you can't get back against Allah and your.
So I'm gonna paraphrase what you said here so we can all hear it and correct me. So high levels of stress distracts you from your ultimate purpose.
No, not that it distracts you, but you lose sense of having faith.
So high levels of stress lets you lose focus on what your faith is all about, and that definitely could happen for sure. So then how do you work with that? Yeah, that's a good idea. How do you work with that? How do you work with that struggle? Because you're so busy trying to deal with the crisis, deal with the trauma, deal with the stress at hand, that you lose sight of the fact that faith, and like you said, Allah is greater than this challenge. Have you heard the statement, my problems are difficult, but Allah is greater than my challenges and my problems? We lose sight of that, definitely. So that's why it's important to bring that, for those of us who do practice and want to bring faith and religion more into your challenges, into your life, redirect your focus and your energy back to the fact that your faith gives you the tools and the strategies to cope with life. It is a blueprint for that. It's not just putting on the hijab. It is not just praying. It is not just maintaining an identity. We know our faith is deep-rooted in spirituality, the psychological parts of ourselves, the nafs, the three parts of the nafs, the self. Those of you who are coming to tonight's lecture, it's a little preview for that. So come to tonight's lecture, and then I'll talk more about that over there, as well as on Sunday. But an excellent point that you bring up is that we lose sight of our faith when we encounter challenges and problems. When in fact our faith gives us the tools and the strategies to manage and work through. If only if we are aware, if only if we reflect. Like the beautiful quote of Imam Ali. I'm going to totally paraphrase here, sorry if I'm butchering it, but there's a universe within us. There's a universe within us in terms of reflection, in terms of problems, in terms of working through things. If only we reflect. And sometimes challenges comes your way. Why? Why does Allah throw these challenges? What are the example that we use from the challenges and the tribulations of Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam? Allah tests and challenges those He loves the most, right? This is where we get our energy and our spirituality and our motivation from these kind of things, right? You are bombarded with challenges because God is wringing you dry, polishing you, right? You've heard these expressions, right? For the next phase of your life, the next challenge of your life, or whatever could be happening around you, right? And it's not easy. It can be brutal. It can break you down. But it's again with that statement that we had earlier about these problems can actually be opportunities. If only you direct that energy, if only you reflect and really use what you have. What have you learned from these problems and challenges? When I say these things to people, by the way, it's not just talk. I'm speaking from somebody not only as a professional here, but somebody who's been through a lot as well, and we all have. Of course we all have, right? But what have these challenges done for you? If not, move you on to the next stage of your life, given you skills, given you an increase of faith within yourself, right? It's not an easy thing. Of course not. Nobody said life would be easy. But you learn things along the way from your mistakes, from your errors, right? And meet amazing people and horrible people at the same time, which can be good for you in terms of being a reason, a lesson, or a lifetime of some sort, right? A lot to reflect on. Is this the first time that you guys have been exposed to the term mental health or the concept or anything related to that? Somewhat, huh? A little bit, no? Good, I'm glad to see the no's because I hope more people are aware of this and learn how to figure out what is a good life, work, school, responsibility, faith balance, because it's individual at the same time, right? Anybody have any questions? So I'm going to take only one question, and then afterwards, unfortunately, I have to run to the next event, but hopefully I'll see you there as well. Go ahead.
So what I understand is that...
Sorry, can you bring it closer so we can hear you?
So what I understand is that you're saying that the stress and anxiety and all that gets your way or loses your faith at some point. But isn't it because of lack of faith that we get stress, anxiety, and we worry?
So the egg before the chicken or the chicken before the egg? That kind of concept, right? So if you don't have faith, right, then you can't handle situations, or you should have more faith, therefore you can handle situations.
Yeah, like if you have more faith, you're able to handle more of that stress of life.
What do you believe? Tell me, what do you believe about that?
I think it's, yeah, the lack of you, if you have faith, you won't be that stressful or unhappy.
So then how do you explain, let's say somebody who's an atheist, who has no stress in their life, they don't have faith, but they're doing great. How do you explain that? I'm totally playing devil's advocate here, but how do you explain that, for example? So this is a common thing that I hear, very much so, from people from the Muslim or any faith-based community when we talk about faith and we talk about struggle, is if you have faith, you should be able to handle the problems. But because you don't have faith, that's why you are having these problems. I don't believe that. I believe that yes, faith and research has shown this, psychological research, that those who do have faith in their lives can help handle problems much better. And the results have shown to have significance, that faith will have an impact on your mental health and well-being, of course. But when somebody comes to you with severe depression, they're not praying, and they come to you and they say, I'm not praying, I do believe in God, but I'm hearing from the sheikhs when I went to get help that, you know, if you only prayed more, if you only read more Quran, if you only attend, you know, a mosque, you would be better. How does that help that person who is severely depressed in the moment? It's not going to help them. So this is where I put faith aside on the plate. It's still there, right? But then we deal with the problem right away at first. So, okay, so you're not eating well, you're not sleeping well, you're not taking care of your hygiene, you're not going to class, you're not going to work. So how does your increase in faith help you with that? If you broke your leg and you go to somebody and say, you know, look what's happened to me, and they tell you, oh, you should pray, that will help you heal your leg. Hallelujah, that's going to make you heal. Really? But that's the problem. It's the lens that we have when we look at mental health. We don't see it like we would as a physical illness. Do you understand the correlation here? So when you break a leg, you're going to the hospital. You're getting to the ER or wherever to get the physical parts taken care of first. When you do that, yeah, you better believe prayers will help you deal with the patients and all of that afterwards. Same thing when it comes to your mental illnesses and challenges. Let's take care of this part first, including perhaps getting some prescription if you have a chemical imbalance, because that is there, and we have a huge taboo around medication with our communities, right? But having that balance, medication can help with that. Getting your lifestyle back in track, you know, taking care of your hygiene, taking care of all that stuff. Then you know what, when you listen to the Quran, when you do the du'as and you're supplicating and you're connecting and you're doing your Allahu Akbar and your prayer, you're going to feel that differently. Right? Do you understand now the connection? Yeah. You're welcome. All right, I'm afraid I am going to have to go, but I do encourage you, for those of you who have social media, to follow the Muslim Counselor on Instagram and Facebook. I post a lot of interesting articles and videos that I find related to the topic in our community, and also on my own personal one as well, Berak Hussain. I'm always interested in doing these kinds of collaborations with different people, because I do believe this is so important within our community to spiritually make ourselves healthy, especially the next generation of the youth that we have and all the challenges that we are experiencing. So you guys are more than welcome to get a hold of me that way. I can't promise you to do any counseling because I'm only allowed to do counseling with Carleton University students. But I'll be more than happy to direct you if you do have any questions or need support of some sort to the resources that you do have in your community, inshallah. Thank you very much, brothers and sisters. I hope to see you tomorrow for the full day seminar where we'll be exploring more of these in more detail. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum.